Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our pre-commission agenda. I want to kick things off with the President's Report, and the only thing that I want to talk about is just some of the activity that's happening on ITD and Compass's side when it comes to Chinden and 43rd. And I want to explain why this is really important. So for those of you that are familiar, we received the RAISE grant this year. We had specific pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure projects that we wanted to plan for, and there were, if you remember our work session on the item, there were 11 in Garden City and a handful others in Boise and the like. Basically the pedestrian crossing RFB or Hawk signal, excuse me, is desired and greatly needed on 43rd and Chinden. And that was one of the projects that was listed in that RAISE grant to plan and explore and ultimately design. Before we even received the RAISE grant, that was in our integrated 5-year work plan. It's also been in other plans. There's also, for those of you that are not familiar with that part of the district, it's the only, I would say it's probably the best and safest access to the Boise Bench, to the Garden City and the Greenbelt. It connects to the Settlers Canal pathway, Answer Charter School, Boys and Girls Club, and all sorts of different types of attractions into Garden City. There have been crashes. Kiddos have been hit and severely injured. Folks have been hit and killed all along Chinden. We as a commission and as an agency have been very vocal about working with Garden City to make sure that we can do whatever we can in our right of way to support safe crossings, looking into Osage and other places so that we can accommodate and continue to work with ITD on making sure that Chinden is safer. So in an interesting turn of events, ITD is saying that they're not supportive of Hawk signal over 43rd, which is deeply disappointing given the safety risk, the need and the growth that we're experiencing down there. And so there was a letter that was sent out to the commission that I want us to send in to ITD and Compass, urging them to reconsider. It's a matter of safety, it's a matter of economic vitality, community connectedness, all the things. And then I'm also going to be urging the city of Boise and the city of Garden City to also sign on to this letter or provide additional letters. There also is a comment period right now with Compass to move this project out of the TIP and consider different projects in replace of it, which my opinion is we should be talking about all of them. It shouldn't be a, this or this. It should be this and this type of project. And then of course the funding isn't an issue. We'll be receiving the funding because we've already budgeted for it, and then we have the RAISE grant. So yes, so that's basically what I'm hoping, that we can get your support to pass this letter on to those that we want to send it to. I did receive Commissioner Hansen's proposed edits to the letter. I will definitely incorporate those, but I wanted to open this up to the commission and see if you have any questions or additional thoughts you'd like to share.
I have a problem with paragraph 5.
Okay.
I would like to see that just eliminated in its entirety, because everybody already knows the problems and conflicts we're faced with the legislature on anything having to do with pedestrian and bicycle safety. And so if we limit our concerns to everything else you mentioned, besides what's in paragraph 5, I think we'd be doing ourselves a big favor.
Okay, thank you.
Madam President,
Commissioner McKinney.
Do we have a complete explanation from ITD about their reasons for opposing it? If we do, I haven't I haven't looked at that, but do we have a document of that sort?
We're happy to share that with you. But basically, if I could boil it, and I don't want to speak for them, but what we have heard from them is that they are concerned about the queuing of car traffic and it disrupting the Veterans, Curtis intersection. However, we know with signal timing and adjusting that and linking it up, that should be very minimal. And so we even had some folks talk to the federal authority and like reinforce that. So it's really based off of, not objective understanding of how we can time that to minimize that impact. But that is mainly their justification.
So they're concerned about impeding traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess, it's worth considering. And of course, they have traffic engineers that are every bit as good as our traffic engineers. So any competent traffic engineer can look at that situation and figure out, objectively, what is the likely influence or effect on traffic. The other question is, of course, and I believe I know the answer to this, but this is not something we can do without their approval, right? This is something where, since it's their highway,
Mm-hmm.
they get to call the shots. We can't just go ahead and do it. So we've got to, unless they, unless we present something to them that changes their mind, that's just, seems like that's the way it's gonna go, so.
Which is the point of the letter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're trying to make it as easy as possible. They literally just need to say yes.
So, Madam President,
Commissioner Hanson.
yeah, and just to that point, we actually do the traffic lights on the state system in Ada County. So we understand synchronizing of traffic lights on busy arterials, which we do all over the county.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got traffic lights close to each other on Fairview and downtown and Overland, all over Franklin. So we understand how this works, and we do the balance all the time of trying to do that. And there's an adjustment. They're very sophisticated, and it's worth going over there and spending time watching those guys, those folks over at the Traffic Management Center, because they really do an amazing job of moving traffic in an urban setting with a bunch of arterials. And so I don't see why we couldn't manage that on Chinden as well with a traffic signal there. I think it's really important too that we actually, the reason we got this RAISE grant is because we have a case to be made, and that we have data and consequences of safety. So we have been presented with a foreseeable risk to human life at this intersection, and that's why it's a priority for us. Granted, we're a sovereign, the state is a sovereign, there's sovereign immunity, but nonetheless, a case could be made that maybe with all this information and with the agreement that the federal government gave us this grant, that maybe this is a justification for waiving sovereign immunity if some sort of event takes place at their totally foreseeable risk to human life. I think that's really important that we understand. This is probably one of the key points in which we really can't say, well, maybe later, because it's likely that something might happen. And of course, one of the few times where we may have a lot of public testimony at a Compass board meeting. And so as there's 3 of us on the commission who sit as board members of Compass. We'll also be sitting as board, so we'll be taking public testimony. I anticipate that. We haven't had very many hearings at Compass on TIP changes, but I certainly anticipate, given the responses from the community, that we will have a public hearing on this if ITD insists on moving forward and requesting Compass's approval for it. So that's why I think, given ACHD's unique position, especially over the management of the traffic lights on Chinden, that we can and should take a position to request that they change it.
Thanks, Commissioner Hanson. Commissioner Gold.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thank you, Madam President. Well, thank you for your leadership and taking the initiative on the letter, and I'm in full support of sending it and urging our partner agencies to also send a similar letter. And I would just ask that we maybe review a final draft with Commissioner, Goldthorpe's and Hanson's edits included. But thank you. I'm in support of the letter.
So my timeline is then to incorporate those edits, send it off to all of you today, and then let us know early tomorrow morning if you have any other edits or concerns, and we'll send it off. Great. That work for you, Director? Okay. Well, thank you all. Okay. Are there any other general housekeeping items or questions about the agenda? All right. If not, over to you, Director.
Madam President, Commissioners, good morning, and such. I'm going to do something I haven't done in a long time, and that's, I'm going to be brief, because I'd like to turn over a majority of my time to Ryan Head, who has some very, great information that we'd like to share with you. First off, you've got your tickets to the State of the City for Boise. Please remember, respectful workplace training is mandatory, and it's being held on the 23rd and 24th. Please see Stacy. She'll set you up with that. There is the Eagle pedestrian bike bridge ribbon cutting ceremony. Commissioner, I know that you're going to be there for that on this Friday at noon. And then final, before I get off the stage, it's going to be Walk Your Dog day on Friday here at the district, as we are going through May in Motion for Wellness for all of our team members. And so this will be very, very interesting. You're more than welcome to attend if you'd like, but there's going to be a long line of dogs going on a big walk here for health and fitness. And again, our wellness program was tremendous this week. Set all new records for people participating. So that's a great sign. So with that, I'd like to ask Ryan come up. He has two presentations for you. One on the newest additions to the rapid deployment operation that we're doing. I think you'll be very excited about that. And number two is an idea on trenching that I think will change how we're looking at this here in Ada County. Ryan?
President Pickering, Commission, it's a pleasure to visit with you today on a couple items as presented by the Director. First and foremost, wanted to talk about our Let's Get There Safely Rapid projects. These are some projects that ultimately are operational projects that we would move forward with, but wanted to make sure the Commission's aware of these because there is some impacts as far as these projects go, but believe that they are essential safety improvements to move forward on. The first, as we talked about briefly back when we were talking about access management, is the Federal Way access management. When we were first talking about that, we were looking at just in front of the Fred Meyers there on Federal Way. This is between Broadway and Burgesson or Geckler. As staff looked at it further, we've identified a few other locations. So at this point in time, we're proposing to convert full accesses, 3/4 accesses, removing the left out at 5 different driveways, as well as now at a public road, TK Avenue. And I'll present why we're looking at that one in particular. We wouldn't normally want to restrict a public road, but this is, there's reasons for this. And then we would direct all of those movements to the full signals that are there at that location. Really, this is a safety improvement. It can angle crashes in these locations and really encourage the signals to be used for what they're intended to be used for. For Federal Way and TK, immediately there to just out of the screen there on the top left, is the Broadway on-ramp signal. And so the close proximity of that intersection to the Broadway, there's not actually a turn lane for people to turn out into. They would have to cross a double yellow or enter into the left turn lane. And so with the volume of traffic there, we just don't believe that it's the right thing to do to continue to allow this. You can see all the crashes over the last number of years that have occurred at that location. And so for those in that location, there on the right is the path that would get to the signal. While there is some inconvenience in having to go around, we do the right decision moving forward. The second project that we're bringing forward is Boise Avenue lane reconfiguration. So this is an area that's going to be going through our chip seal program. In this case, at this point in time, there are 3 lanes. There's a full center turn lane through this entire stretch. This is between Apple and Law. However, we don't believe that that's really needed. Needs to be 3 lanes throughout this entire stretch. If we keep the 3 lanes at the key intersections of Boise or Apple, Law, and then I believe it's Holden, we can provide some additional space for safety improvements for bicyclists where the lanes are already they're smaller at this point in time. So that we would propose to complete with the chip seal program. The other is a request that's been received to reduce the speed from on Boise Avenue between Law and Eckert. So this is just immediately to the east of that. On Friday, it is our plan and has been directed by the director to lower the speed limit from 35 to 30. There's a lot of reasons for this. There's front on housing. We have received a request from the neighborhood. There's on-street parking in this area. There's a lot of to make it so 35 is probably not the appropriate speed for safe operations. And so the proposal would be to lower the speed, and then as chip seal occurs, we would propose a restriping, some modification to the travel lanes to add a bike lane buffer. There's some areas along that section that have lightly used parking. Some have more intensely used, and that would remain. But where it's lightly, that we have the ability to remove that parking so that we can get wider buffer for the bike lanes in that section to improve it for all users. So just to give you an overview, this is the sections. All of that then would have buffered bike lanes or enhanced facilities for all users going through that section and a consistent speed of 30 miles per hour. If there are not any questions, I'll move on to the next piece of the presentation.
I just want to thank you, Ryan. I just want to highlight, because we talked about the Federal Way piece when we had our work session on access management. And so I just want to applaud you for working through that, reviewing the crash history, and moving forward on adjusting that. So thank you.
All credit goes to the team. They are working actively on this. Thank you.
Commissioner Hanson.
Madam President and Ryan, I really appreciate this. Just to clarify, the rest of Boise Avenue is 30 miles an hour, and that's one of the reasons why the neighborhood circulated a petition back last fall, requested this, and so I'm glad we're finally moving on it. It also helped define why we need to have specific features to ensure people then follow that speed limit. There's a church and school, as you said, there's crossings there. We did put a rapid flashing beacon at East Burgesson and Boise Avenue. We're gonna have an enhanced crossing for the bike facility that comes down from Columbia Village and crosses over at Holcomb. So there's a number of things going on, and this is really good to make sure that everything's designed with the correct speed limit instead of a false one. I would say on Federal Way, I would ask that you include the one intersection right near there. The crash history of those turning are purely cars. It's cars bumping into, hitting each other. There's a segment there, they accelerate, they don't pay attention, and then there's someone trying to get into a left turn lane. So all that crash history is related to motor vehicles. We've already been requested by the neighborhood with regard to the crossing there at Burgesson and Federal Way to get to that same area. So people walking, biking, and the construction of that signal box next to what amounts to a continuous right turn lane probably violates our policy, because it does impair the ability of drivers to see someone approaching. So I would ask us, since that's also going to be chip sealed, that we do something to tighten that, that follow the request. There's a request in our 5-year plan for some changes to that, but there can be some short-term stuff that could be done in order to tighten that radius so people actually do stop before they turn right. The risk is that we give them such a wide turning radius, and then they can come right into a merge lane, which is really long. So there are already 2 lanes going west, and then we give them a third wide, long right turn lane, so there's really no reason to stop at all. No reason to even look. And so this is something we will get, people will notice the change, and then the request will be, well, why were the concerns to automobiles priority when we've already raised this issue of people walking, biking, and using wheelchairs at that one corner of that intersection? So I would like to see if there's some of the rapid implementation pieces we can do at that intersection, at that one corner where the visibility is so poor and the safety of pedestrians is a concern that's already come to our attention. So I would ask that be included.
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, thank you for that and bringing that to my attention. I've already asked my team to take a look at that, and they will get back a report. I don't want to hold up the improvements that we can make at any point in time. Any safety improvement we don't want to put on the back burner in any way, but we'll definitely identify and report back what we can do at that location.
Thank you.
So the second piece that I have to report really is a report out on some information that was presented to us last week by a company called Crown Castle. They are a fiber distributor in this area, as well as 5G technology. So what they are proposing is a new deployment methodology for providing fiber faster and in ways that we haven't seen in this area. Really what it looks like, what you see here are kind of the three ways that fiber is distributed. One is our typical policy, which is traditional trenching. That is that utilities are placed at 30 to 36 inches below the ground. It requires about a two-foot pavement cut to get those utilities in place, and then patching back. Another proposal that we've seen recently a number of times is micro trenching. The city of Boise presented on this to the commission in alignment with some of the other technology companies that want to come in this area. We're in the process of reviewing what that looks like from a policy perspective, and we'll bring back a proposal. Really, one of the concerns we've had with micro trenching is it really creates some supremacy by whoever that does the micro trenching, putting them above other utilities. And so we want to make sure that is taken into account when we do this. The new methodology that Crown Castle, and I would just mention that there are some members from Crown Castle on the line if you do have questions that they can answer technical things, is what they're calling Rapid Connect, which really is placing it just below the surface of the asphalt within roughly about a half an inch of the surface. And what's done is and I'll show you what it looks like in real life here in a second, is that they have a machine that cuts out a small section, and then there's a small tiny trench or a tiny cut that's put in where the fiber goes in, and then they backfill that with a sealant tape that goes in place. It's a tape that's used for striping as well, that they've looked at and said, well, if we can put this in place, it makes the surface back flat, and they're able to do it quickly. Some of the comparison here, and really why we think that there's value to at least look a little bit further at this, is that it really occurs almost immediately. They are able to cut, put the fiber in, and close it back up within a single pass, removing the lane closures, the impact to the public, and it's done quickly. It doesn't obviously strike utilities, and that restoration is immediate. One of the biggest concerns, especially from an ADA perspective, that we have is the impact of these trenches happening consistently. So it impacts and creates all sorts of detours and other things. Now, ultimately, if it's on the surface, that still has some of that supremacy conversation. And what we've been told is because it is on the surface and just put down with this adhesive tape, they're able to come in and remove it. And get it out of the way for any utility that needs to work underneath the ground. And that in a very short order, they're move it and then put it back once that work is completed. So it's an interesting perspective on how this would be done. And because of the narrowness of that, they're saying that that tape works with vehicles, it doesn't come up. They've tested this in a number of different places. That's why ultimately we believe that you should test it first before we, and see it in real life. And so our next steps really are that we would, we're meeting this afternoon to talk about what a pilot project would look like. They've said that they're able to come bring in the equipment, do an install, leave it for a year. Let us see what freeze thaw does. Let us see what the weather does and how that impacts and holds up over time. And then we can see if this is a viable method for deployment of fiber in the right of way. As you can see here, that's the equipment. The front machine comes in, makes the cut in that first picture. They lay the fiber in place with that second individual who's walking behind, and the tape's put down right immediately over top of it. So it's an interesting idea. Ultimately, it's not envisioned in our current fiber policy, but we'd like to do this pilot test with them, get an idea, so we can propose good policy if this is the methodology to bring forward for further installation. And ultimately, we believe policy is the right approach, opposed to just a license to do it, so that all companies have the ability to use that. So with that, I'll stand for any questions, as well as individuals who are online, if you have any questions for them.
Thank you, Ryan. I have a couple questions. So how is the city of Boise, and I think the whole effort across the county, have they been involved with this pilot? And are they involved in these conversations about this pilot?
Madam President, Commission, these conversations started last week. They have been invited to presentation today, so that they can hear this as well. As soon as we get an idea of today of what a pilot will look like, we'll definitely ensure that they're invited to witness and see what this looks like, and they can see how this technology can work with their system as well.
And then how long do you think the pilot will need to go on to effectively evaluate this type of deployment?
Madam President, at this point in time, the plan is to test it over a year, to see how the different weather patterns holds up to traffic and those types of things, for us to really get a good idea. They've had this in place. They've worked with, I want to say it's Corning, if I got that correct. They can correct me if I'm wrong, to develop the technology, and have had it in place on their campus for 3 years. So which is in New York. It's so it has some of the same weather freeze thaw impacts that we would see. And then they've been testing it. It's been holding up very well. It's almost like a 3M product that you put on like your wall that holds in place. Once it's really compacted there, it stays until you do certain things to pull it up. So.
And then would it also work, I mean, I'm assuming it works on pavement, but does it also work on concrete or other materials that we might use in the roadway?
Madam President, Commission, yes, it does, and they color match the tape to those products, so it doesn't look different. They can match it to the asphalt, to the concrete, to those different things, because they have boxes and junction boxes that they would tie in on the sidewalk that would be level as well. So,
thank you, Ryan. Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Yes, the tape there on the far right picture, that is obviously as wide as the cut, but is it as thick and deep as the cut so that it's level on top?
yes.
So that's like 2 inches?
Madam President, it's 2 inches wide, and it's about a 1/4 inch thick.
Oh, that's,
The depth is only about
oh, okay.
Madam President?
Commissioner McKinney.
Yeah, I do have a couple questions. Ryan, and of course, you've mentioned the cold weather, and of course, testing with snow plows to see if we, make sure we wouldn't have a problem there. But, and do you know, have they tested it already in those kinds of conditions to see whether it resists getting, pulled up by snow plows?
Madam President, Commission, yes, according to what they presented to us last week, yes, they have.
Okay.
And that's what that pilot would also allow us to do, so we can see it far.
And then it's got to have some method for getting from where it is in the pavement to places outside of the pavement. How do they do that? Do they tunnel under curb and gutter and sidewalk? How do they handle that?
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, the images that we've seen are, that they're actually able to take it up and over the sidewalk, and use the same methodology through the sidewalk to get it behind.
I see. So they cut down into the surface of curb and gutter and sidewalk, and then when they get to, like, landscape areas that they have to cross, are they just putting it 2 inches under the surface there?
Madam President, it might be better if they answer, okay?
Yeah.
Stacy, they should be on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Mr. Letty?
Yes, thank you for the time today. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about.
Hold on, Mr. Letty, we can't really hear you very well. Let's
Yeah,
adjust
you
our
can
volume.
speak up.
Can you get closer to the mic?
Can you hear me now?
Somewhat.
Let's just,
Oh,
hold on.
better.
Can you try again?
Yeah, I'll
Better.
try to speak up a little bit too, just to make sure that you can hear everything I'm saying. So in answer to your specific question about what happens when we get to the other side of the curb, if it's in a softscape area like a beauty fringe on the side of the road, we'll go back down to depth and encase our fiber in a conduit, and then place a small vault, traditional telecom vault, as the enclosure that would house our connectivity. So we put a small splice case in there, and that's how we would connect to the end user application at that point.
So does the cable then leave the paved area for every connection location and then re-enter again? Is that how the connections are made?
That's correct, yes. So the intention is to have that technician access happen outside of the roadway. So whenever we place a node or an enclosure, we move outside of the pavement, back of curb. We have a method of creating a vault in hardscape. That is a very low impact method. It just creates a small circular core in the concrete, and in softscape, we just use a traditional method.
So then if the cable is headed down a street with, a series of homes, each one of them that's going to be connected, then it seems like we wouldn't have one cable just running down the street. Instead, you've got a series of kind of loops where it comes out of one property and goes into the next one, comes out of the next and goes to the next. Is that the way that it works?
No, not the method that we're describing here today is in support of small cell densification. So it's far fewer enclosures that we'd be placing. Our typical placement would be between 500 and 800 feet. You'd see an enclosure back of curb. This would be in support of something like a 5G service in the area, maybe fixed wireless access to the home where there is no direct fiber connection going into the home.
I see. So we're connecting wireless nodes rather than connecting individual residences. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. That is correct, yes.
Okay, all right.
Okay, Commissioner Hanson?
Yeah, Madam President, thanks, Ryan. What other cities have had this, or are we the first in which this is going to be done?
Madam President, Commissioner, they've indicated about 70 from different places in California and Texas and Chicago, other cities. I don't have the full. We're not number one.
Okay, but just recently, this year,
Yes.
so it's still brand new all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try to provide a little more clarity there. We've been actively deploying in the right-of-way for about 1.5 years now.
Okay.
Yeah, so not a tremendously long period of time. It's a new innovation that we've developed outside of the right-of-way for about 3.5 years, and then we've been 1.5 years actively deploying in the right-of-way.
So, Madam President, I would just say the city needs to be the driver on this. We don't regulate telecommunications. And, whether there's 1 or 10 competing for that space in the right-of-way, it may not make that much of a difference, but we can't, by adopting a policy, then create an entitlement to some vendors and not to others. And so really, this is not in our jurisdiction, other than the fact that in this unique case in this county, I'm sure Mr. Letty has discovered that you have 2 jurisdictions. The general purpose government doesn't control their own right-of-way. we do, which is a separately elected body of government, and yet we don't regulate, obviously, the health and well-being of the community. That's the city and the county. So I just want to make sure it's crystal clear that the city is the driver on this, and that we don't inadvertently create some sort of entitlement or right by the way in which we adopt a policy to allow for this kind of activity. The other is that, of course, testing with respect to signals. Presumably, the reason we have certain things buried deep is signals. I don't know what, or we put wires high up in onto poles is the risk of interference, and we have, obviously traffic signals that are really important. I don't know whether that's irrelevant in this case or not, but obviously that's something we want to make sure that is addressed, because that's what we are concerned about, the movement of people in the right of way.
Thanks, Commissioner Hinton. Yeah, thank you, Ryan, for your leadership. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Gold, do you have something?
I do. I just have a comment. I know that increased fiber access is a priority all across the county, and so I just appreciate your continued effort to look at options and what that translates into our policy. So thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to echo, I see that we have some city representation online, so thank you for alerting them that this was going to be presented, and I urge our cities to, and you Ryan, to really work in tandem together, because I know all of our cities have very specific goals and expectations of how they want this to work, and obviously we want to help facilitate that. And I think it's a great suggestion that we would follow up with a policy update as a result of the pilot, and really speaking clearly around what our expectation is and what we're going to allow or not allow in that process. So,
For sure.
great work.
Thank you.
Director, is that it? All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's now 12:11. Please join us in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, and welcome everyone in person and online for joining us today. All right, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Next item is the consent agenda. All items on the consent agenda are considered routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. All consent agenda items are commission action items unless otherwise noted. If there are no such requests, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
So moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, moving into the regular agenda. Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Madam President, because this is the fourth time that these items have appeared on our regular agenda, I don't believe we need to have any massive debate or discussion, unless someone wants to. And then,
Question,
okay.
what's the status of the funds
Yeah, so
for these projects?
I'd like to invite Director Wong up to give a brief update.
Madam President, Commissioners, again, good afternoon now. I have not heard back formally from ITD at this point. I have a call that they've scheduled with me for next Monday at 4 p.m. to continue our discussion as to where we are. So that's the current status that we have at this point.
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
In that case, the longer this drags out, and I'll just say this with a huge tongue-in-cheek and smile on my face, the smarter I look for saying let's defer this indefinitely instead of week by week by week by week. And so my motion for the first item number one is going to defer the decision on this until such time as we have the funds promised by the legislature, and that ITD already has those funds to be in our bank until we, approve these projects.
So, quick question, Commissioner Goldthorpe. So you're saying you want to defer until we've actually received the money? Is that what you're?
Absolutely.
I think, would it be
Commissioner McKinney.
appropriate simply to say defer the item to a date uncertain?
That would be fine too, would accomplish the same
That,
thing.
isn't that what we're saying? Because
Mhm.
we don't know when we'll bring it up again. I would second that.
Okay, it's been moved, seconded. Any discussion? I just want to ask, before we take a vote, Director, I'm gonna vote in support of the motion, but I'm just curious, we've been delaying this because we haven't received any traction on their requested MOU that we signed. We have not received, obviously, the funding. And we've talked about how this is going to impact our ability to coordinate with ITD in the construction that is already underway. So Director, how is this lack of, teamwork and the funding, how is that impacting our ability to coordinate these projects with ITD if we continue to move down this path in this way?
Madam President, an excellent question. Our concern here at the staff is that when this initially occurred a year ago, when we were supposed to have that funding, as you recall, our plans and projects team had presented you a very detailed process as to when we would be at certain parts of the Highway 16 construction to minimize the impact on all of the citizens and neighborhoods that we're going to impact going forward. That gave us time to start the planning process, the design process. That time has passed. When the legislature approved the funding for this, for Highway 16 and the approved $36 million to the Ada County Highway District, that was in about the January timeframe, as you recall. That gave us, we were at about a 6-month opportunity now to be able to plan, design, start work so we could be in somewhat step with ITD, which was the original plan going forward. Today, with the delays that we've seen as they're working through this, that time has passed also. So the concern for the commission would be that as this continues to move in a sort of a paused perspective, that will impact the Ada County Highway's ability to be able to expeditiously build those local projects with ITD. I think, quite frankly, now as we walk through this, Highway 16 will be built. We're going to be behind, and we're going to be. I'm not playing catch up. I'm not saying playing catch up, but the bare truth of the matter is that with the time frames that we had believed we had through the discussions that ITD had given us, they're gone. And so we are starting from, I'm not going to say scratch, but those projects are no longer, from my perspective only, in link and in line with what we had intended to do moving forward with ITD. So we're going to talk about congestion. We're going to talk about impact to the system. We're going to talk about a mess, potential mess forward. So that's, I think, Madam President, that's the reality of where we are. That being said, Madam President, I will assure the Commission that this staff will move mountains to ensure that whatever time we start, we'll do our best to minimize those impacts, but they're there right now. Madam President, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Good answer. I would suggest that possibly our Public Information Department can make sure that anybody who's looking at our website for answers to these deep and abiding questions about why we're not in step with ITD on this, that they'll find the answer very quickly. I would also remind all of us that it's not basically people in Ada County that are going to be inconvenienced by these projects not being done the way, and other than some of the folks around Star, and I would make sure that they understand better than anyone else the reasons for the delay. But frankly, I'm not as concerned about the folks, the hundreds of thousands of daily trips that come in from Canyon and Gem County that do not, they impact our roads greatly, but they don't impact our bottom line at all in terms of revenue.
Commissioner Henson?
Just want to say, we were just asking for a few simple clarity, some simple things. We haven't been able to do it. I think, I'm now going to side with Commissioner Goldthorpe. Let's make it clear. We were just asking for some simple things, something that Christine probably could have produced, in a few minutes.
In the MOU specifically.
Yeah, just to clarify, the way in which the funds would be processed. But we're there. The other, I just want to take exception, congestion's going to happen over there, not because of, the timing. It's going to happen because of the development patterns in that area and the building of, there'll be movement of traffic up and down Highway 16, which will flow nicely as traffic moves back and forth from north to south and vice versa. But once they exit, doesn't matter how wide we build Ustick or Franklin or the other roads, that's where the congestion is going to happen. It's going to happen anyway, just because of the development patterns that are going to be encouraged on that side of the county and on into Canyon County. So this is not going to in any way affect people's perception of congestion. It's going to be there.
All right, if there's no other discussion, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Madam President,
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
I would make the same motion with regards to item number 2.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Madam President,
Yep, Commissioner
I would
Goldthorpe.
make the same motion for item number 3.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
And Madam President, lastly, I would make the same motion for item number 4.
Second.
been moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Aye.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, that was the end of our regular agenda. Moving into public communications. Ms. Spencer, is there anyone that would like to address the commission at this time?
I do not have anyone.
Okay. Director. Is that related to, or are we just jumping ahead to the?
No, Madam President, members of the commission, I just wanted to take this moment. I know it's a spot in the agenda where we don't normally do this, but you've had a busy schedule today. I just want to take a moment to introduce our new senior transportation planner, Aaron Williams. He's
Welcome.
really excited to have. We're really excited to have Aaron on the team. He comes as a recent graduate of Boise State University with a master's in public administration with a focus on government. He also has done some work at the city of Boise related to their projects and project development programs. So he comes to us with a lot of great experience and education, and we're just so excited to have him on the team. With that, that's what I had, and thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. All right, with that, I will call the meeting adjourned. Moving into our no, we did not. Yep. So moving into our post-commission agenda, our first work session is on 2023 chip seal. So welcome, Lloyd.
Madam President, Commissioners, for the record, Jennifer Behringer, I'm the Deputy Director of Maintenance. Lloyd is handing out a couple of handouts that we'll talk to a little bit in the presentation. Lloyd's going to do the bulk of the presentation, but I just kind of wanted to kick things off and let you know how excited we are for this chip seal season. I wanted to introduce not only Lloyd Carnegie, our maintenance manager, but today we have all of our superintendents in attendance. So if you haven't had a chance to meet, not only do we have our maintenance and our fleet superintendents, but our traffic ops superintendent, who's often here as well. So we've got Bobby Amadon, who's superintendent of Adams, and Rich Shaw, superintendent of Cloverdale. Heather Friddle is superintendent for Ustick. Aaron Chestnut, superintendent for Fleet, and Greg Fullerton, hiding a little bit behind them, superintendent for traffic ops. Lloyd and I are going to kind of tag team the presentation a little bit. So this is the traditional kickoff to our chip seal, but I also wanted to address some of the concerns in a few slides with one crew versus two. So I'll hand it off to Lloyd.
For the record, Lloyd Carnegie, maintenance manager. I'm here to present the chip seal program. I do want to make attention to the picture that we have here, our new Heck and Lively Express. This is in recognition of Clint Heck and Lively that just recently retired, but he was our main man for chip seal, so we're going to miss him this year. Start off, we have a quick video that explains our chip seal and kind of demonstrates what we do.
What tomorrow will bring, maybe down the road. Well, it's alright, even if they say you're wrong. Well, it's alright, sometimes you gotta be strong. Well, it's alright, as long as you got somewhere to lay. Well, it's alright, every day is Judgment Day. That was a short video of a very long process that we do all summer long. But as you can tell, it's very involved, and we will go through that process in this presentation. So we get asked a lot of times, why do we chip seal? So the moment you put a road down in asphalt, it starts to deteriorate. So you got to put it on some sort of maintenance plan. And so you can have a maintenance plan of where you just leave it until it falls apart and you would have to do a major reconstruct or a mill and overlay, or you can put it on a preventative maintenance schedule, such as what we do with chip seal, and it will actually prolong the life of that road for longer with cheaper costs. As you can tell, our chip seal costs are only 22 cents per square foot, whereas a mill and overlay cost is almost 10 times that price. So we're able to do more lane miles and keep the roads in Ada County in great condition, as we can see with our PCI ratings that we have here in Ada County. So that is why we chip seal. So our preventative maintenance strategy is we have broken the county into 7 different zones. And in each of these zones, we will go in and chip seal every arterial and collector roadway and 50% of the residential roadways. So this will equate to basically every arterial and collector roadway being chip sealed once every 7 years, and residentials once every 14 years. And the strategy has been very effective in this county. With that, I'll turn it over to Jen.
So splitting out the chip seal a little bit, in detail, so you can really understand what goes into a chip seal team. On the left side of the screen are all the positions and vehicles that it takes for a single chip seal team. And on the right side, we've got our fog team, the sweeper crew, paint crew, and flaggers. So I've got the positions indicated and the number of FTEs with the X, and then where we need the temporaries. So doing the quick math, I'll save you from doing that. It's approximately 100, 120 that we would require to field a single team. And then if we move on to 2 teams, it's not quite double that because we're able to find some efficiencies with the sweeper crew and the fogging and the paint crew, but we'd be looking at close to 200 still that would be required for fielding 2 crews. HR's been doing an incredible job finding us FTEs. Where we are having a little bit of a shortfall, is in the temporaries and in the flaggers. So when you look at the shortfalls, a big one is really in the trained employees as well. So with us scaling back and doing 1 crew for the past several years, the opportunities for training haven't been there for everybody, but even more so, we've been getting so many new people. 60% of our crew hasn't been through a chip seal or has only been like on the tail end last year's. So a very large percentage of our crew force hasn't seen this process at all. And then another significant driver is our distributor drivers. So that takes a lot of skill. It takes probably 3, 4, 5 years to really become tuned in on how to drive that distributor truck. So we were training a couple of people and they've promoted out and taken other positions. So we're kind of back to square one to get new distributor drivers. So we're good for distributor drivers for a full team, stretching a little bit if we go to 2 teams. So that's a focus area, is getting those started to train up so that we can get to the 2 teams and eventually the 3 teams successfully. So we're really plussing up on the distributor driver training this year. Flagging, as I mentioned, we've been working with Specialty, and they're able to easily manage supporting a single crew. They've been having the same struggles with hiring that we've been having, so fielding 2 crews, they've been hesitant to fully commit on that. Things are starting to look up in the hiring though, so that is definitely potential. Plus we have a lead on a second company if they're not able to fill, so we would have Specialty run 1 crew, and Bighorn, once we really get into negotiations, we can see if they could do the flagging for the second crew. On the previous slide, when you talk about the number of people that it takes for flagging, it really depends on where we are. If we're running in arterials and we're running it at that higher speed and lots of intersections and a lot of cars moving at a high pace, we're more on the upper end of needing maybe 25, even 30, maybe in some cases, flaggers for that. When we're down in the residential areas, they maybe need fewer. So we do have that possible benefit when we go to the 2 crews, that the residentials, one would be arterials and collectors and one maybe just on residentials for a slow start. So those are things we're thinking about as well. For the paint operations, the speed of operations is really a push on that one, and I'll talk a little bit about temps on the next slide for the paint operations too. But when it comes to the markings, that's really kind of the limiting factor. When we go to the 2 crews, getting the markings done, all the prep work ahead of time to make sure that the delineators are marked, a lot of that is impacted once we go to 2 crews because we're getting more mileage in that. And then I mentioned temps, and things are actually starting to look a little bit better just in the last couple of days on this front. Each chip seal crew needs 17 to 21 temps, depending on which side is doing the fogging. So you've got 38 temps total that are needed. Currently, HR has been able to pull together 14 for our chip seal crew. So again, things we've got enough temps for 1 crew. We backfill with some of the other extras that we have for the full-time employees, and we can get there. It's a little thin to run to 2 crews. The broom crew needs 8 temps to run the sweeper dump trucks. We currently have 5, so we're getting close. And then the paint crew needs 15 temps, and this is where they're really hurting. They currently have 3. So overall, somewhat of a shortfall for the temps, but the update I just got from HR this morning is things are starting to progress as we're getting closer to the chip seal season. We're starting to see more people signing up. So I don't think we'll be 100% for 2 crews on day 1. So this is why we brought it to the director, and the director made the decision for safety We'll start the season with one composite crew to start, and then we'll go back and reassess after a month to see if we can get to that 2 crews this summer. The goal is that we get people trained up 100% where they need to be, so next year there'd be no question. We'll definitely start with 2 crews next year. That's where I really want to be on this. So Lloyd's going to talk to what that means. I'm going to a single crew and the rest of the plan for the year. Any questions before I step down?
If I may, Madam President?
Commissioner McKinney?
Jennifer, how does the, going to 1 crew instead of 2, how does that affect our overall plan for hitting all the different areas of the county on our schedule?
You'll talk to that.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay, step down.
Thank you. So yeah, our plan is to, May 30th is when we're gonna start. But in regards to your question, Commissioner McKinney, we are prioritizing our 1 crew to do the arterials and collectors because we have over 300 lane miles of just arterials and collectors this year alone. So that's gonna be our first priority. Then as we reassess and we're able to have more resources and we can split into 2 crews, that's when we can start going in and hitting those residentials, again, focusing on the schools, newly paved roads, and then roads that were not chip sealed the last cycle. That's the priority that we're gonna be doing the chip sealing this year. Did I answer your question? Perfect. So a quick overview. The total anticipated cost for the chip seal program is gonna be $5.8 million. It's gonna be roughly 20,000 team hours. We have 309 lane miles planned to date with the arterials and collectors, which will be about 5,800 tons of liquid asphalt and 31,000 tons of aggregate that we're gonna be putting on the roadway this year. So a lot of work for the 1 crew so far. So to quickly explain the process of chip seal, the big part of it at the very beginning is our sweepers. They have to go out and they sweep the road to clean all that debris off that roadway, because if you don't have it clean, when that emulsion gets applied, it will not stick and it will just peel off afterwards. So it's very crucial step. You go to any other project such as slurry seal, microservicing, that's also a very crucial step. So when you see stuff peeling off, usually it's in the prep. And so our broom crews are already out right now, sweeping roadways, getting them prepped and ready for our chipping crews to go along. So after they've been swept, our chipping crew will go out and start chipping the road. As you can tell from this picture, we do go against traffic, as that is a safer method in doing chipping on arterials and collectors, as you can see the traffic head on and you're able to easily direct them off to that free lane. We will have flaggers along the procession to make sure that they stay out of the procession and keep it safe for our operators, but also for the traveling public. So we find going against traffic is the most safe method to do this process. But you'll have the lead worker out front in the truck, watching and making sure that the rates are going down right. We have the distributor putting down the emulsion. Right after the distributor comes the chipper box, and they are spaced out just enough so that when that oil begins to break is when they're starting to put that chip onto that oil. And it's the chipper box is calibrated to make sure that we're putting the right amount of chip on the roadway, so it's just enough to embed into that oil and we're not putting too much down. We have trucks lined up behind that chipper box that's constantly feeding that chipper box with aggregate. It's very unique and skilled for our drivers to not just have to back up, but also have to back up and connect to the chipper box on the fly. So we have some very talented individuals, and that's where that training comes in, because not everybody's proficient at the beginning. So we really want to make sure we have that time to give them that proper training. And then right after the trucks comes our 3 rollers. And these rollers, again, they were orientating the chip into the oil to make sure that it's full embedment and that we will have less chip loss because it has been fully embedded into that oil. It's not for compaction, it's for orientation. So after it's been chipped, we leave it for about 3 to 5 days for that oil to fully cure. Then we send the sweepers back in to sweep up any excess chip and then prepare it for our final fog seal. This fog seal is very important to our operation as it provides that last seal across the entire roadway, which then also allows the chip for less chip loss. It really embeds that chip into it. And then it also provides our paint crew with a brand new canvas for any for the lines that they have to paint, And if they need to do any adjustments to those lines, it gives them that ability to do that if they want to add a turn lane, a bike lane, or just adjust the lanes somewhat. It gives them that opportunity to do that. And so after we fog seal, the paint crew comes in shortly after and repaints the lines and makes it like a brand new road. So chip seal doesn't just start on May 30th. We've actually been working on this already since the beginning of the year. Our fleet shop has been inspecting and testing and doing any necessary repairs on all of our chip seal equipment. And then we've been having several meetings. We have been meetings with our chip seal leadership team. These are the crew chiefs, the lead workers, the ones that really know how the operation runs, and they're deciding what the best flow to make sure that's efficient, as well as provide training. We've had meetings with traffic, utilities, our bicycle coordinators, pavement management, GIS. We had a meeting with Ada County Sheriff's Office, the dispatch office, as they are crucial, as they take a lot of phone calls and they have a lot of eyes and ears out there for us. And so the more information we give them and the more they understand of our operation, we help one another. And so they know where we're going to be, kind of the procession we've also indicated of our map, and they're going to really help us out this year as well. We've had meetings with Specialty, our traffic control contractor, ITD. We have a lot of roadways that are intersecting with ITD roadways, so we want to make sure we have that proper coordination. The traffic control plans that we're putting together meet their standards and the time of day that we're doing it, and we want a safe and efficient operation. And also with our towing companies. We're here today giving the commission our overview, and then we have our communications connection meeting on May 25th, where we invite all the other agencies around to come and get a similar presentation so they understand what our chip seal process is, where we're going to be, and should they get questions, who they can contact. So again, everybody's in the know of what we're doing. For our schedule, again, May 30th is our start date. We're going to be doing refresher training, which takes about half the day. There's where we have a presentation, and then the operators get to go out, and some of them, this is their first time actually seeing this equipment and understanding what it does. And so we're going to definitely have a very good soft start for that first week, getting the equipment out there, having them run it, and start that process off slow. June 19th, we will not be chip sealing, as that is the Juneteenth holiday. So again, we thank the commission for approving that. And then we also do not chip seal during the 4th of July holiday week. There's a lot of programs and events that go on during that week, and the less congestion we can put onto the road network, the better. So we will not chip seal that week, but we do bring our equipment in, do any adjustments, do some cleaning. We also have a safety stand down, so we do have lots of things that we do during that week, but it's just not chip sealing. Our estimated completion is August 31st, and we plan to have our chip seal victory party on September 21st, which you are all invited to attend. We'd love to have you join us for that victory party. With this program, communication is key. And so our communication team has really helped us in putting this strategy together. You guys have examples in front of you of the mailers that have gone out. They've already been hitting mailboxes, so starting to get to know in the Zone 4 area that we're going to be chip sealing in their area. They also, we revamped our door knockers, and so those again get put out, 5 to 10 days before we're out there, get that information so they know we're going to be soon into their area. And then we also have no parking signs that go up, and within 24, 48 hours, that's when the crew's going to be there. But we've got digital, the social media that's going to be going out there with the new rebranding. I think this is really going to help because it's going to really, certain colors identify certain things, so they're really going to get used to knowing that this means chip seal and where we're going to be. So I'm looking forward to that. We have our interactive map that we really encourage citizens and anyone to go to, because it really shows the roads that we're doing, where we're at, what's been chip sealed, what's been swept, what's been fogged, and then also what's been painted. So that whole process is in there so people can see exactly where we are. So hopefully they can answer most of their questions. Again, collaboration, like we have that communications connection meeting next week. We have a lot of city entities coming to that. We talk to sanitation companies, HOAs, ITD. Again, a lot of communication with all the different agencies around us to make sure that they're aware. So again, we're in our preventative maintenance zone 4. This is a map kind of depicting the area that we're going to be in. The red lines show all the arterials and collectors that we have planned for this year. And then as we reassess and have the potential to go to 2 crews, there'll be more residential roads added to this map as we see the ability to do so. So again, we'd like to invite you all to come join our team out on site. They love to show the operation that they're a part of and the expertise that they put into this. And so we really appreciate when we have the commissioners come out, and they love to hand out candy. But anytime you guys want to come out, please get a hold of Jennifer, and we would greatly have you guys out there. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Lloyd. Commissioners, Commissioner Hanson?
Yes, it was a great ride along a number of years ago. I highly recommend it. And I'm going to suggest, if it's okay, that you extend the invitation to city council members, to members of the press, which probably Shandy's already doing, and to neighborhood association leaders. In Region 4, there's a dozen neighborhood associations, because that will then give them the ability to understand these are incredibly skilled professionals who are doing this. They're doing it incredibly fast and efficiently, and that they would be really good mouthpieces to go out, and maybe even, who knows, they might even say, hey, you know, they could do this on the rest of our local streets if we had just a few more flaggers. Anyone know any? So it could, but I would really encourage you to invite neighborhood leaders, especially because they talk a lot, and you want those leaders to say, hey, you know, they had me at 22 cents per square foot.
Okay, thank you, Lloyd. Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah. All right, so moving on to the second item in our work session, our second work session item, excuse me. The capital improvement plan update. Mr. Ensign Batista, welcome.
Commission. So for the record, my name is Edinson Bautista, ACC Senior Transportation Planner. Thank you, Commission, for today. We're very excited to deep dive into this update of the ordinance of the impact fee and this capital improvement plan. We're currently in the process of hiring a consultant, which will give us an opportunity to take advantage of their expertise in the development of the CIP and explore what are the best and emerging practices to ensure the CIP stays up to date with regional and national standards, as well as to continue to comply with the Idaho Code requirements. I wanted to give a shout out to the Compass staff that it's in attendance today. So we have Matt Stoll, Marianne Waldinger, Austin Miller, and Mitch Skiles in the audience. So yes. And they will be supporting us if there's any specific technical questions regarding the travel demand model or the CIM, since that's efforts that they conduct. As part of this presentation, staff wanted to provide an overview, a brief history behind the ordinance and the capital improvement plan, as well as dive into the steps that that this CIP update will consist of, and then dive into the preliminary work from that happens between 2020 between the latest update to this year's update, between ACHC work and Compass 2. And this is in response to commission comments during our kickoff meeting to create that foundation behind how we get into the updates of the ordinance and the capital improvement plan. And finally, next steps in the process. So we wanted to start with the Idaho Code, since the main goal of the ordinance and the CIP is to meet those established requirements. The Idaho Development Impact Fee Act, Title 67, Chapter 82, was added in 1992, and it's broken up into 16 sections, which details the standards and requirements of the development of impact fee ordinance, impact fee advisory committee, what entails the imposition of impact fees, development of a capital improvement plan, earmarkings and expenditures, and more. The overall purpose of the statute is to ensure adequate public facilities are available to serve new growth, allow new growth to pay a proportional share of the cost of new public facilities. The statute also established that for any jurisdiction that plans to impose development impact fees, a capital improvement plan needs to be developed in coordination with the Development Advisory Committee, in which case for ACHD, it would be the Capital Investment Advisory Committee, CICAC. ACHD has worked diligently since the statute inception in 1992, and it has adopted 13 iterations of the impact fee ordinance and the capital improvement plan, with the latest iteration being the 2020-2040 capital improvement plan. The CIP is prepared to meet the requirements of the Idaho Development Impact Fee Act, which is detailed in the Idaho Code 678208. In the plan, there's a summary of the requirements, and in addition, and in the description how the CIP addresses each of the sections of the Act. Currently, there are 11 requirements in the Idaho Code. In addition to meet the Idaho Code, the CIP is developed in coordination with plans adopted by ACHD Commission, including the ACHD Strategic Plan, the Integrated Federal Work Plan, the Master Street Map, the sub-area plans like the Floating Federal Road, Cunamora, Lake Hazel Corridor Studies, and others. In summary, the plans identify 145 road projects and 96 intersection projects. The CIP estimates the total cost of this improvement is over $1 billion. For reference, in this slide, we also included a graph displaying the percentage of completion of the arterial network. Again, Commission, as part of this update, staff will work with a consultant to review regional and national best practices and emerging practices. This will ensure that the CIP stays up to date with current practices as well as continue to meet the requirements established in the Idaho Code. In addition, there will be a comprehensive review of any ACHD and partner agency work that could impact the CIP, that has been completed between 2020 and 2024. This includes the Master Street Map update, the Integrated Five-Year Work Plan update, and the Compass Community in Motion, just to mention a few. This will allow us to create a good foundational starting point that will be used in conjunction with planning tools like the Regional Travel Demand Model, which is owned and maintained by Compass to identify existing and future transportation needs in Ada County. After identifying these needs, we enter into the impact fee related work where cost estimate and revenue projections are calculated. At this point, we would prepare a draft plan that will be released from the public review and finally presented in front of the Commission for adoption consideration. At key points throughout the process, the Capital Investment Advisory Committee and the ACHD Commission will be given presentation and updates of findings and recommendation for action. So in the next couple of slides, we want to share with the Commission more details regarding the preliminary work that sets the base foundation for the update. Starting with ACHD work, a lot has been done between 2020 and 2024 with projects that have been completed since 2020. This includes projects like the 10-mile widening that we need to keep records of to keep our database up to date. Then we have updates like the Master Street Map changes that occur with the latest update that included the change to the arterial network like the Warm Spring Corridor. Finally, we do a compilation of any updates or changes in the ACHD plans or guidelines that can require further review through the CIP. These plans include the Integrated Federal Work Plan, sub-area studies, Roadways to Pikeway Master Plan, and Strategic Plan. In addition, we wanted to highlight the work done by our partner agency, Community Planning Association of Southwest Idaho, or better known as Compass. Compass serves as the Regional Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, for the Treasure Valley. And you might be wondering how Compass relates to the CIP. Well, Compass owns, updates, and maintains two major planning tools that support the development of the CIP. These are the Community in Motion, or CIM, and the Regional Travel Demand Model. The CIM and the CIP use similar analysis process to identify future transportation needs with the use of projected growth, demographic, and land use consistent with the cities and county comprehensive plans. And these are analyzed through the Regional Travel Demand Model. Compared to the CIM and the Treasure Valley focus, the CIP takes a closer look at Ada County and its transportation needs in response to the projected growth in each of the 6 cities and county. With the work done through the CIM 2050, which includes the update of the demographic with the support of the 2020 census data and the regional travel survey, as well as consistent updates to the regional travel demand model, staff feel confident that we're taking advantage of the most up-to-date data resources available today. Staff also believes that with the support of the CICAC and their review process, we'll be able to refine the transportation needs across the Ada County. At many points through the process, staff will also come back in front of the commission to share findings and address any questions or concerns. Staff would like to highlight some interesting findings from the review of the preliminary work. With Compass diligent work throughout the years, the forecasting methodology has continued to improve. An example of this is their forecast calculated in 2004 for the 2020 population in the Treasure Valley. This is the image on the left on this slide. In 2004, the estimated population was within 5% of range of the final value. Additionally, recognizing the continued growth in the county, having the CIM 2050 vision certainly shows that more is to be expected. And being able to identify where transportation needs will be in the future is key for ACHD continued support of the community. Overall, the model is a planning tool that allows us to review and determine how the network reacts to growth, land use changes, demographic, and road improvements in the county area. This allows staff as part of the review process to make well-informed decisions based on the data available and make adjustments following ACHD existing plans and guidelines. Finally, Commission, our next steps in the process, we're currently in the process of the RFQ, seeking consultants, both regional-wise and nation-wise. And then following that process, we would kick off the project we estimate for the June timeframe of this year. And then throughout the entirety of the process, we will come back in front of the Commission and also the review process with the CICAC and ACHD Commission. Finally, we're looking for an adoption for the summer, fall 2024. And with this, I conclude my presentation. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Edinson. I appreciate you incorporating and following up on the Compass data piece because that was brought up at our last work session. So I appreciate that, and thank you, Compass folks, for being here. Can you, Edinson, describe a little bit more in more detail about what are the particular deliverables that this consultant will be delivering on with this in the RFQ specifically?
Yes. So as part of the scope of work for this project, we will start with a review with a exploratory task where we're looking at the best practice and emerging practice regional and national wise. So this includes some of the studies that have been done, and thank you, Commissioner Hansen, for sharing the 24-hour analysis because that opened up that conversation and allows us to look and expand that view. So we're taking exploratory to see what other similar agencies are doing, and then how we can make sure that the CIP stays up to date with the current times and the current practices. This also includes the review of service areas and all those elements that are within.
That was going to be my next question. Okay. Can you go into a little bit more detail about that, Edinson?
I don't have any details just yet, since with the support of the consultant, we will do more in-depth review, but we'll make sure to come back in front of the CIC and the Commission to provide more details behind that information. And then after doing that analysis and in the review process, we will enter into the meat of the CIP and the update, which is the transportation need analysis, where we take advantage of all the data I described during the presentation to identify what those transportation needs are, also calculate those impact fees related work, which are the cost estimates, revenue projections, which then would at several points, at key points throughout the process, certainly we will come back, provide our findings for the Commission review and the CIC review as well. So, and finally, we enter into that draft portion of it, where it's released to the public. The public will have an opportunity to review it and provide their feedback to us, and then ultimately coming back in front of the Commission for adoption consideration.
Thank you, Ensign. Commission, any questions? Commissioner
Always
Hanson.
questions. Well, this is critical. It's interesting because it always struck me as, and I've said this many times, it's odd that we have something called a capital improvement plan when it's really only dealing with the impact fee eligible, focuses on and driven by impact fee eligible projects. And it's 20 years. Compass has a longer range plan, regional transportation plan, and we have a 5-year integrated work plan. So that we have sort of an overarching integrated vision that are using models and so forth. And then we have a shorter range integrated, and it's getting better and better and better every year. And yet we have this interim thing called a capital improvements plan that's really about which arterials are we going to expand, because that's the only thing we can use impact fees on. What I'd like to see us do is move towards an integrated 20-year plan, because we do have all these 20-year goals to try and reach with respect to all forms of transportation in the right-of-way. Now, only a certain portion of them are going to be impact fee eligible. And we use modeling, spend a lot of money modeling to try and figuring out, how many cars are going to be generated from this kind of development and so forth. And so where should we be widening the arterials first? We'll eventually widen all the arterials, perhaps in my lifetime, that are eligible. And then the question is whether we then pay for widening arterials in Canyon County. But the 20-year plan should be an integrated one. We should move away from this whole notion that that's the only capital that we're concerned about in the range between 5 years and 50 years. We do have to recognize that we have multiple transportation models that we can tap into in developing a 20-year plan, not just the movement of single occupancy vehicles. So I'd like to see us in approaching this consultant saying, how would you make this a more of an integrated plan? We move away from the notion that CIP, it would be just a 20-year plan. And the impact fee eligible portion of it would be that, which we're required to have under the statute. But it would be a plan that would incorporate all modes, much as we have at the 5-year level and at the regional level. So that's a direction I'd really like to see us moving, so it's a fully integrated plan, and we get away from the notion that the only thing we're concerned about at 20 years is what's impact fee eligible.
Thanks, Commissioner Hanson. All right, any other questions? Okay, thank you, Edinson.
Yeah.
So it is 1 o'clock. I want to pause. Do we want to take a 10-minute break at all? Or are we okay? Is that a yes?
Sure.
Okay, we'll pause for 10 minutes, and then we'll be back at 1:12. Excuse me. All right, welcome back, everyone. It's 1:12. We're going to go ahead and kick off our third part of our work session today, the Livable Streets Performance Measures and Multi-Use Pathways presentation. And so excited to see you, Tom. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the Commission. For the record, Tom Laws, Planning Manager with the Ada County Highway District. And I'm really excited to be here. Multi-use pathways is an item that really over the last 2 or 3 years we've been bringing back regularly, and it's probably been at least a year since we've come before you. So I'm excited to have this conversation going again, and especially as you know this area is continuing to evolve throughout the country. So for today, I really want to just take a step back and talk about our approach with bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, talk about our livable streets design guides and our level of traffic stress, and really how pathways are incorporated within the planning and projects team. So going all the way back, really the realm and view of bicycle and pedestrian movement within the Ada County Highway District hit full steam back in the early 2000s. And this took place primarily with the pedestrian and bicycle transition plan back in 2006. And at that time, best practice across the nation, what we were hearing from our advisory committees, what we were seeing here in the county was to build for the strong and fearless. And what that included was your standard on-street painted bike lane. Obviously things have changed and that has continued to evolve. And really the critical change point with us started occurring around 2018, 2019, 2021 with the Bike Master Plan update, the ADA transition plan, and then our Livable Streets performance measures. And at that time, there was a clear shift nationally as well as here locally, moving away from that strong and fearless, strong and confident user groups to all ages and abilities. And how we decided to tackle this was with that Livable Streets performance measure component. And the approach we took was to incorporate that into our transportation and land use TLIP. Within that document or that package of documents, we have our complete streets policy, our cost share ordinance, master street map, Livable Streets design guide, and then the newly added Livable Streets performance measures. Over here on your right is just an example of what that original document and guidance looked like. It had a five foot on-street bike lane, curb and gutter buffer, and then that sidewalk zone as well. And so knowing that we needed a change, in 2021, we undertook the Livable Streets Performance Measure Plan. And really the goal with this was to use industry best practices, but to make it adaptable so we could use it based on local conditions here and really context sensitive across all of the projects that we do. Its focus is to look at relative comfort and safety for bicyclists and pedestrians. And once again, it was really meant for building for all ages and abilities. And one of the components of that was creating a measurement for all. So nationwide, when you think of automobiles, and how you measure really congestion, traffic delay, it's through the lens of level of service. And we've had that for years. However, with this guide, we wanted to create something similar for bikes and peds. And what came out of that was the level of traffic stress, or LTS. With that, there's a four rank scale, and the goal is with every project we create, we are either moving for that 1 of high comfort for all users or 2 high comfort for adults. To create the plan, it was really a multi-step approach. It was built in full coordination with the ACHD's advisory committees, and we actually had a subcommittee as well that met regularly, was made up of individuals from the advisory committees. We had frequent milestone checks with our partners and fellow jurisdictions, and we developed the guidance from industry leaders. So we brought on Alta Planning and Design, which is really known nationwide for their bicycle and pedestrian planning. They helped lead that effort with us. And then we really tried to reference national guidance and those best practices throughout the document. That proposed some challenges from time to time, and here's just one example of that. When we're talking about the buffer space in between the multi-use pathway and the travel lane, if you refer to the 2021 AASHTO guide for, I'll say the pedestrian guide, that reads that if there's less than a 4-foot buffer between that multi-use path and the travel lane, that any fixtures in that buffer are not recommended. However, this directly conflicts with what we see with the AASHTO bike facilities guide, from 2012, where if the separation is less than 5 feet, they are recommending a physical barrier or railing. And so we really tried in coordination with our consultant, with those advisory groups, with our partners to come up with approach and guidance that really took the best of all of these. And so what came up with, specifically relating to pathways, within our document can be found in 2 pages. There's a small section within our bicycle level of stress, raised and protected lanes with multi-use paths section, and then multi-use paths are also referenced within our pedestrian sidewalk buffer. And what we found pretty quickly is we had a limited emphasis on pathways within this document. And so one approach that we did, and this was led by our DTS group, was in 2022, we felt that we needed to already deeper to that multi-use pathway guidance. And so we teamed up with Kittleson and Associates last year to help develop some more of the engineering drawings and do a deeper dive into pathways. At this time, we really felt the importance to focus more at the intersections where you have really the highest safety risk, the increased chance for those conflicts between bikes, peds, vehicles, and all users. And so we developed guidance similar to the page shown here, where you actually divert the multi-use path away from that adjacent high-speed facility at those intersections, at those crossings. I would like to highlight now that with these documents, they've really been developed in 2021, 2022. The typical project, as you know, takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years. We have the design phase, the right-of-way phase, the construction phase. Sometimes there's a concept study in between or prior to, but we are able to kind of start implementing this right away. So we did go back with some of those designs and make changes. Here are 2 examples of recent projects: 10 Mile Road, Victory to Overland, and then Eagle Road, Amity to Victory, where we are already able to go back in, adjust the design, and include some of that diversion at those intersections to try to make it safer for all users. Similarly, we're really starting to incorporate this more and more into our current designs. And so here's just 2 examples I wanted to walk through. The first one, Linder Road, State Highway 44 to Floating Feather, does a good job to show you how we take in context the context sensitivity of the road. And so just moving from your left side of the screen to the right, the multi-use path on this design is that kind of blue speckled feature. And what we're proposing are bioretention swales as the buffer in that lime green color. As you're moving along, there's landscape medians, and I'd like to highlight that we really look to our partners and working with our partners to add landscaping along these corridors. And so this is kind of a great example of that. As you continue past, going more to the right, you can see where we do those offsets at the intersections, once again, increasing that buffer even more. But then we are limited by the constraints of the right-of-way and the cross-section. And in this section in particular, that top right section, you can see the Dry Creek. So what we have there is proposing bringing that, removing the bioretention swale, adding stamped concrete instead. And that's really a way that we're able to still incorporate a buffer, but then acknowledge the constraints that are along that section of the corridor. The second example on the bottom of the screen is just right across the street with the Reed Street realignment. And with this one, we are working with Garden City to implement street trees all along the buffer of this multi-use path. And so you can see that called out there in the pink shading and the tree canopy in itself. And so this is just another multi-use pathway example where we're pulling that, connecting from the greenbelt, and having a nice buffer of the street trees there. So moving forward, I really just want to highlight that the pathway guidance is continuing to evolve. And there's really 2 main things here that I want to mention. That AASHTO but Bike Guide was in its 4th edition that was complete back in 2012. There's been a draft floating around since 2018, but we're really looking for that update of that 5th edition of that guide to really help inform us of best practice nationwide. Similarly, as we speak right now, we have 2 of our team members attending the NACTO conference in Denver, Colorado, where once again they're attending to learn about these best practices with all different types of facilities, but really taking the leading industry experts from major cities across the nation and really internationally to bring those guidance and recommendations back here to Ada County. As I mentioned, really the first projects that are including this new guidance from 21, 22, are just now being implemented within our designs right of way, and we're starting to see those being built more and more. There's really context-sensitive design throughout, and we do see some right-of-way challenges. One example with that Dry Creek on Linder Road. But at the end of the day, these documents, the full intent were them to be living. We knew that these were constantly going to be involved, and we looked forward to being able to come back to you, have these conversations, see what implementation actually looked like, and continue to make tweaks and changes as the process went on to make sure that we're building the best product for everybody. That really concludes my presentation. I'm happy to stand for any questions right now. I do know that we have a continued conversation with the policy side of Pathways, so happy to wait, happy to present or answer any questions right now, but with that, I'll stand.
Thank you, Tom. Before I ask other commissioners to chime in, I appreciate, thank you for the updates. I think overall it's really helpful as we look to see how we can, integrate a policy that establishes what our goals and vision is for and expectations are for multi-use pathways. Anyway, my question is, although it's important to obviously wait for like the best practices, but I think it's great to use those best practices and those latest additions to inform our work, but sometimes we don't need to wait for that to be published to know what our communities need. So as you've seen this, latest plan and document be implemented over the last few years, are there ways that you guys have been taking notes about what isn't working and what is working and how that can be improved upon?
Madam President, member of the commission, that's a great question. I think there's probably two ways that really come to mind. The first is the interaction at the intersections. That is without a doubt the most dangerous location for all users. And so looking for, trying to find ways to make everyone more visible, make it safer for all users. That's something we've been really trying to pay close attention to, and tying that into the next item, which we're proposing to continue study, or actually kick off a study next year with our access and mobility team, and that's looking specifically at transitions. And so how do we transition from a multi-use path down to a raised bike facility or a standard bike lane? How do you go from a multi-use path down to a sidewalk? That's something that we've tried to address at a project-by-project basis, but we're really looking for some national help and guidance there to better understand really the best ways to help with those transitions between facility types. A lot of these new projects are tying into existing or older infrastructure, and so making sure that we're making those connections in the safest way is something that I don't believe has been addressed in the past, but we're looking toward studying that and planning for that moving forward.
Thanks, Tom. And is there any opportunity to look into updating the document, I don't want to say overhaul, but really dive a little bit deeper and incorporate some other elements like air quality or the street trees conversation? Is that an opportunity that we can start capitalizing on in the near future? Excuse me.
Absolutely. I would just say that whether that's appropriate for the Livable Streets Design Guide or more another addendum in TLIP itself, I think, with commission direction, we can look to, add those components, add additional guidance. I failed to mention off the start, but we view this as just kind of that kickoff conversation. And so we'll look toward your direction to really plan our next steps with this moving forward. And at least on the planning and programming side, I think our accessibility and mobility team is the perfect group to kind of tackle some of these questions and start diving in deeper.
Thank you, Tom. Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Hanson.
Madam President, Tom, thanks. This is fantastic. I know that I appreciated the reference early on. There's, when we move forward on one thing, we may have old language sitting over here that actually contradicts it. And so we have two different sets of people who were following two different sets of guidelines, and there's conflict. And of course, that's what happened when we adopt a number of these policies, and we still have old language still in our policies, which contradict it. And one of the things I was wondering if Kittleson has done some of this analysis to say, here's where you just need to take out the restrictive language from the policies and refer back to what you've adopted so that the living document that you say continues to incorporate best practices isn't constantly having to be constrained by specific references. One great example is to roadside barriers in our policy. It really just talks about its impact on cars. You know, how is this roadside barrier going to impact a car who's going to bump into it or keep them? And it's not, it doesn't contemplate how is it being used to, affect speed to protect other road users, or what's its function as a delineator for other uses, et cetera. So there's, and I'm sure that's just one of thousands of little references that contradicts what we've adopted, so that it makes it easier and we don't have to say, oh, how long is it going to be before what we've adopted over here is reflected in our policy. Does Kittleson do some of that analysis and say, here's where you need to change the archaic language in your existing policy, which hasn't been touched for years, so that it refers back to what you are doing?
Yes. President Pickering, Commissioner Hanson, I'll punt a little bit of that question over to Steve and Ryan with the policy discussion up next. I will say that specifically within our effort with ALTA and the Livable Streets Design Guide, we did have some next steps which dove into wanting to look at our existing policy and making some of those changes. MIG was looking into that a little bit as well with the accessibility and ADA work that they were doing, but I'll definitely defer to Ryan and Steve to speak more to that.
And I would just say, President Pickering and Tom, this is just a logical thing that cities should be doing as we become denser, as we become urban. We can't pretend like we're not urban. And taxpayers are demanding this. It's not just we like it because they're demanding. You have right of way, use it to the most efficient way of moving people as possible. Don't keep asking for more and more and more and more and more right of way. Let's show how you can use existing right of way more efficiently to move people. So it's really about this transition into urban, and we can't pretend like we're not urban. We're one of the fastest growing urban areas in the country. So we have to do that. One of the things I noticed in some of your diagram, you talked about how do we use that right of way space efficiently. In the analysis, there's a lot of places that, okay, there's space. We don't need it for pedestrian, we don't need it for a swale, we don't need it for a car to drive or park, but it's still there. By default, we tend to just say, well, let's just pave it and let a car use it, and what that unintentionally does is it says, well, here's some space you can drive faster, or maybe you can park, or maybe you can pass, instead of thinking, well, if we don't need it, let's not designate it for any of these things, but keep it maybe just for a raised crossing. Do we do that sort of analysis, or do we continue to default to a place where, well, if we don't need it, we'll just pave it. It's easier to chip seal, and we'll just let the cars deal with it?
Yeah, President Pickering, Commissioner Hanson, I think two examples probably jump out at me within the design process there. The first is within every single design that we're working on, we have the cities as partners at the table, and we really look to, I think, in options or opportunities like that, can we incorporate some landscaping, in those buffers, in those kind of unused areas? The bioswales, for example, on Linder, I believe the city of Eagle is proposing trees in that section as well. So that's one way where we really look for those partnerships to try to use some of those existing extra areas. We're of course looking to, if there's available space, add it to that buffer in between the multi-use paths, in between the travel lanes as well. And I guess there's technically three. The third one that comes to mind is our raised medians, and looking at with those 5-lane configurations, 5-lane cross sections. If we really don't need that extra space, if there isn't a lot of access, or maybe there is and we need access management, can we look at raising the medians, once again working with our partners for landscaping or doing some other treatment that way?
Yeah, that would be great. And I was just wondering if we just also say, hey, for automobile lanes, we have a minimum and a maximum width.
Yep.
And so that's it. You have a minimum and a maximum width, and the rest has to go somewhere else. It may not be for a bike lane, but has to go somewhere else. But that's what we're going to build instead of the minimum in any size.
Thanks, Commissioner Hanson. I want to add too, and I know it's a tricky dance with our city partners in the county. Especially like looking at that Linder example. Folks are going to be going super fast, And a swale, although it's gonna give space, it's not gonna actually give protection because people are gonna be, you know, at that speed, it's gonna be really easy to cross multiple lanes of traffic and potentially strike someone or whatever, right? And that doesn't offer that protection if it's just a little swale. So I know that that's something that you know that I'm passionate about, of how can we incorporate more vertical elements, whether that's trees or, you know, concrete barriers, whatever it is. And I know that you guys are all working with the cities on trying to figure out the maintenance and the costs and all of that, but I want to emphasize, like, that's, we know how important the space is, right? Due to safety, livability, all of those things, right? And connectivity. And so not maximizing it and creating like this space that doesn't offer any type of protection outside of just space I feel like is failing in some respects. So I know it's sometimes that's out of our control, but I think we should be that much more emphatic about the importance of those other elements.
Noted, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Hey, I'm just remembering where we were at 9 years ago.
Yeah.
And thanks to everybody, because there's been a lot of changes, including from the legislature, make these wider pathways possible in the county and all that good stuff, so.
All right, thank you, Tom. So then moving on to our fourth and final item, foundation on pathways policy, Mr. Price.
Good afternoon, Madam President, Commissioners. For the record, Steve Price, General Counsel. This is really Ryan's presentation, and I'm only speaking for a very brief moment. But I guess they put me on top there just because I'm going first. So, you're welcome. So in what I've handed out to you is really a distinction of different pathways. And I think I've looked at the city and the city's definition, if you look on page 6.
And Steve, you're speaking specifically just to the city of Boise's definition, not all cities, right?
No, but I thought this was a good definition to show really as an example of how the law is divided on pathways. And if you look at it, it makes a distinction between shared use paths and side paths. And I thought that was particularly very good. By the way, this Boise Pathway Master Plan is a very, very good document. It's 184 pages of exciting reading, but I have to say the city of Boise really nailed it in putting that together. And Ada County, by the way, they're currently, for their over 150 miles of pathways, they're currently going through the development of a master plan like this as well, right now. But in any event, state code dictates the use of side paths. ACH does not have a formal policy. The use of multi-use paths is something that we've just kind of done in the past as a project, but the use of multi-use paths is something relatively recent. Pathways with development is not a universal opportunity, but we have the authority to exact those improvements, which we currently do. And a lot of developers, by the way, I think that many conversations, they like the multi-use paths, and they're most certainly happy to dedicate the right of way and make that improvement. But a flexible pathway policy would help. This is the Idaho Code on Highway Districts that really makes a distinction between sidewalks or side paths. If you recall, a couple of years ago, we were limited on how wide the paths could be. And we went in and changed it, and you'll see that was the language we put in there unless the governing board makes a written finding supporting the public necessity for sidewalk or side path of greater width. That would give this commission a lot more leeway. It doesn't set this kind of minimum maximum. It gives you the discretion to make that decision, and that's why we made that change. But in terms of ACHD's authority, we only have jurisdiction of those pedestrian facilities that are in the public right-of-way. Those are the two code provisions that really define that. Counties and cities have jurisdiction over trailways and pathways outside the public rights-of-way. If you look at the Local Land Use Planning Act, they put it, the pathways really is within the component within the plan is recreation. Ada County they've done several plans. One that's kind of famous is Ridge to Rivers Pathway Plan, and then the Boise City Master Plan, which I've showed you, and I'll turn it over to Ryan. But some of the commissioners recall about 4 years ago, the legislature, let me back up. We don't have the authority to condemn land for pathways outside the public right-of-way. And the cities and counties under their statute, oddly enough, do. And that kind of divides the power, who has the jurisdiction and authority. But the legislature, they felt it was important to change the eminent domain statute so that no jurisdiction has the ability to condemn property for pathways outside the public right-of-way. You recall that, and we fought that, but that is the law. So it's been a real bummer, if you will, in the ability to develop a strong pathway system. We started back about 15 years ago the idea, when we had a case against settlers, to try and convince them to allow the development of trails or pathways along many of their irrigation facilities, and that was rebuffed, and it continues. But the city of Boise and Ada County have been working with the irrigation districts to expand that opportunity. The one thing that we have done, and it's probably the point of this presentation, is in the development of those plans by Ada County and the other cities, is our staff most certainly are involved in coordinating that. There's a lot of opportunities for our side paths to be developed in coordination with other, their trails or their pathways as well. Those connections is where I can tell when you look at those plans, our staff has been involved in the development of all those plans, and I can't imagine that changing. So with that, if you don't have any questions, I'll turn it over
Madam
to
President, I do have a question.
Commissioner McKinney.
Thank you, Steve. Just to clarify for my benefit, the distinction between side path and sidewalk is simply that sidewalks are designated only for pedestrians and side paths can be designated for multiple use. Is that the distinction?
It is considered a pedestrian facility, and they use that term. And a pedestrian facility can be it can be a sidewalk. The side path really a detached sidewalk in the statute's frame of mind. Sidewalk is addressed directly adjacent, attached, and a multi-use pathway is not, but they're both pedestrian facilities, and we have the authority to make those improvements on any of our projects.
A side path is defined as purely a pedestrian facility? Is that what we're saying?
It is not purely defined. It also, the statute doesn't ever, we include pedestrian facilities, not just, we also, pedestrians, we include that as bicycles. The statute has no definition for it. We've tried to change the definition in the past without success. There's a reluctance to make clear that bicycle facilities actually exist. But in any event, we feel that pedestrian facilities includes those bicycle facilities. And our conversations with legislators is that, yes, a side path can be included for bicyclists and pedestrians. And electric vehicles, believe it or not.
Right, okay. Well, if that statutory language that we looked at just a second ago, a couple slides back, the statute, it said, if you notice there in the third, let's see, line 4, 8 feet in width for a sidewalk or side path, which implies to me that there's a distinction that the two are.
One's actually connected to the roadway, the highway. The other one is separated, but it has to be adjacent to the roadway.
Okay, so it's not considered a sidewalk if there's a buffer between the curb?
No, it would be a side path.
Oh, okay. All right, thanks.
I would rephrase that, because there are buffers in between sidewalks, that there can be buffers between sidewalks and the roadway, and you're saying that it.
No, the buffer sidewalk is attached to the actual roadway surface.
Right.
You can have a
And that
buffer.
could include a buffer space.
It most certainly can.
Yes, I just want to clarify that. Okay.
Quick question.
Commissioner Hanson, really quick.
Frankly, they don't matter,
Yeah.
the distinction.
Yes.
Just quick question. Of course, you can, cyclists can ride on the sidewalk even if there's a bike lane.
Right.
Which is why it's, whether you call it a sidewalk, side path, multi-use path, it's can be multi-used. People need to understand it's not illegal to ride your bicycle on a sidewalk if it feels unsafe to ride in the bike lane. My question has to do with unopened right-of-way. It's unopened, so it's not being used for any purpose particularly now, but it's still right-of-way, so we can, ACHC can put pathways in there even though there isn't an adjacent roadway in the unopened right-of-way. Is that still, it's possible to make, and we've done that with the Shamrock Bikeway and others where there's not a road that goes through, but it's still ACHD right-of-way. You know, ancient times ago, it was maybe contemplated to be a road, but it never was, so it's unopened.
Madam President and Commissioner Hanson, that's a great question. I think Shamrock Bikeway goes through an unopened right-of-way. And we give the local jurisdiction a license agreement to use the unopened right-of-way. That's how that pathway exists. And typically, any improvement that we make to an unopened right-of-way constitutes an opening. And so that's why legally we've maintained that distinction between unopened and a license agreement. But for most of our roads, for a sidewalk or a side path, that's all within the right-of-way.
Right.
But working with other jurisdictions who are trying to do these connecting pathways that aren't in the right-of-way, and we have property, I can't think of a time that we have not allowed them to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve.
Madam President, Commission, for the record, Ryan Head, Development and Technical Services Deputy Director. Just wanted to touch base because when we talk about policy, we're talking really about the ACHD policy manual. From a capital projects perspective, as Tom just presented, the intent of the commission, the direction of the commission can be implemented at any point in time. When it comes to development, we're far more regulated by what's in our policy. And so when we say the current policy really is crickets, it is. There's nothing in our development policy that envisions or talks about these pathways. However, there's practice. And recognizing the intent and the direction of the commission, our staff has done everything but require a developer to build pathways. We can ask them to, and regularly, as Steve mentioned, they do. They want to do that. We can encourage and recommend the cities require it because the cities can be go farther than our requirements, and often they do. Some cities don't, but most cities do. We can encourage detached sidewalks. We can't require, but we can encourage that be the case, and most cities then all require that they be detached. When it does come time for us to expend any funds through a cooperative development agreement where we enter into an agreement as approved by the commission with the developer to expand the scope of their work, we definitely would include the 10-foot multi-use pathways in those situations. Now, staff's looked at our current development policy, and really what's here in black is what the current development policy says. It requires a 7-foot minimum attached or 5-foot minimum detached located behind the curb. And so it doesn't really envision that pathway. Now, what staff has recommended or has drafted here would give the opportunity for staff to make that requirement. And really what's highlighted there in bold is we believe that it's appropriate that staff needs to be able to look at every condition. For instance, say you have a parcel along an arterial with 100 feet of frontage, and on both sides of it you have the detached 5-foot side. In those circumstances, for that brief 100 feet to have a joint bike pedestrian facility, it gets a little complicated. And really what we're trying to tie it to in this language is tying it back to our capital improvement plan. When we know that there's going to be an improvement that comes that would guarantee that we would get that 10-foot pathway in the future, that we have that flexibility to really look at that, to require it if it makes sense. Say a developer has half a mile of frontage. In that case, we're going to require the pathway be installed, and we make those appropriate transitions. But if it's those small sections, we think it's appropriate to have a little bit more flexibility there. Now, in this draft language, we're also proposing that there be that required buffer. Now, we said 4 to 14 feet. That was based on our livable streets performance measures. That 4 feet to get to a level, a certain level within our livable streets. However, that's flexible, right? What we really wanted to requires that it be at least close enough to the roadway, but also far enough from the roadway, and to encourage that there be the addition of street trees and other types of facilities. And tying back to how our policy is written, that we encourage those street trees as long as they're going to be maintained by that developer, that adjacent HOA, so that be part of that process. So this is just a draft that staff's worked on. Just wanted to put that in front of you just so you have the opportunity to comment on that. It's just some other considerations that would need to be made within our policy. We'd want to have language that addresses the offsets at intersections, as Tom highlighted there. When you have a median and the pathway is going to cross a roadway, how wide is that connection? We want it to at least be the width of the pathway, so that provides that clarity there. How wide's the ramp as it enters the road? You want it to be as wide as the pathway, making sure that that's clear. The other thing that it's not just arterials, right? We have bike lanes on collector streets. And if a developer wants to install a pathway in lieu of on-street bike facilities, we think that's an appropriate place to provide that higher level facility as opposed to something on the street. And so that would be one area we'd want to provide that flexibility as well within the policy. So overall, that's just the brief presentation I had on what our development policy says. At your direction, we take any feedback on that, and we can talk about next steps.
Thank you, Ryan. Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Yes, just curious as to some definitions, I guess. When you're talking about the width of a pathway, where it starts, where it stops, I've seen some emails going back and forth, in particular about the Maple Grove project. I don't know if you've seen some of those, but here comes someone who has. I appreciate that, Justin. Thanks. Because it's a little confusing to me anyway.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Justin Lucas. I'm the Deputy Director of Planning and Projects here at the Highway District. Glad to answer any specific questions about our capital projects. So, Commissioners, on Maple Grove, I believe what we're currently proposing in the design, And there's a lot of semantics and measurements here. I'm gonna do my best to be as clear as I
that's
can,
exactly
as
right.
clear as I can. So when we talk about the buffer space, oftentimes we're just referring to the stamped and colored concrete area that we have. On Maple Grove, that stamped and colored concrete area is 4 feet wide. Now, the guidance documents, when they talk about how to measure buffer space, they may be talking about a different measurement. I believe the AASHTO guidance in the current BITE guide, the 2012 guide, talks about measuring the buffer space from the face of the curb to the edge of the adjacent pathway. If you measure it that way on Maple Grove, you're at 4 feet 6 inches. And what we were talking about today, there's some confusion about, well, should it be 5? Should it be this? Should it be that? Other agencies measure it from Massachusetts. I've looked at all kinds of documents. Some of them measure it from the edge of the travelway. Some of them measure it from the face of the curb. Some of them measure it from the back of the curb. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it. But what I'm telling you is the way we talk about buffer typically is it's the space, the distance basically of that stamped concrete area. And that is 4 feet. So then depending on where you measure it from, you could say the buffer is 4 feet 6 inches if you include the top of the curb. If you include the whole curb and gutter, you could go to over 5 feet. It just depends on how you measure it.
And then the measurement for a multi-use pathway or something starts on top of that, correct?
Correct. So then you have that buffer, that stamped concrete area, then the multi-use pathways that we are currently. So we don't include the 4 feet of stamped concrete in the measurement for the multi-use pathway at 10 feet. And so that's kind of how we're doing it to now. But that is basically, I would call it our minimum. As Tom showed, there's a lot of places, especially at every intersection almost that we're building, where the buffer is widened. There's also places where we're coordinating with the city and the buffer is widened. Where we have stormwater facilities, the buffer is widened. And so I don't want to give you the impression that it's always going to be 4 feet of stamped concrete. That is not how it is on, every project is different. There's spaces on USTIC that we're designing right now where because of where the curb is as it relates to some power poles, we're actually placing the multi-use pathway behind the power poles, so the buffer in that situation may be 10 feet. So we really look at each situation very, very carefully. Maple Grove's an interesting one. As you know, the right-of-way there's a lot of front-on housing, there's different impacts. So in a corridor like that, we try to find a reasonable buffer space that balances the goals of the commission to install buffered multi-use pathways with the right-of-way impacts on each project and property owner, and that's how we work through the process, if that makes sense.
I just recall from some of those conversations going back and forth and on the Maple Grove project, and not trying to conclude anything here whatsoever, but because it can get confusing anyway to those of us over 70, that as those decisions are thought through maybe once or twice before we're done, that we actually hear about that as a commission.
And thank you, commissioners. And as we go through updates to the guidance and as you see more documents, we're glad to bring more of that back to you if that's the interest of the commission.
If it's not the interest of the commission, I'll just come and sit in your office.
Yeah, and once again, on a specific capital project, any specific questions, we're glad to share the current plans, answer any questions you might have, and why we're doing what we're doing.
Right. Okay, cool, thanks.
Commissioner Hanson?
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up, I think it's so critical that we use this level of traffic stress 1 and 2 as the guide, rather than some length of feet. You know, that you could have enough space, but if the cars are going 65 miles an hour and one loses control and there's nothing really stopping them but a little curb from jumping over, then people aren't going to feel safe and they won't use it. And the whole idea is we want people to use and to feel safe on those pathways. So the key is, okay, if it's not safe at the current width, we can make it without some sort of physical barrier, some sort of physical protection. Then what sort of physical protection do we need to put in there so we achieve level of traffic stress 1, ideally, because this is a neighborhood. So it seems to me that is the determining, and that's where I think the conflicts arise, because we have a tendency to put feet or, you know, some sort of objective measure in our policy, and then we say, well, that qualifies, so it's good, it's good to go, when in fact, the real life experience of someone using it is, no, this doesn't feel safe. So why build it if it's not gonna be used, if it's not feeling safe? So that's why I think it's really critical that tie together to our level of traffic stress, and we don't build stuff that people aren't gonna use. I have two more questions. One, I think it's important, Ryan, to tie in my comment to Edinson earlier. You know, we have a CIP, we've identified where in the undeveloped areas, here's an area, when it does develop, this is what we would like to happen. This is why I think the CIP has to include all parts of the county, because there are areas that have been developed, but we know in the future they're going to be redeveloped. And that right now, an attached sidewalk next to an arterial, you know, a 4-foot attached sidewalk and a 3-foot little bike lane, and then a huge arterial like Overland, people don't ride in that bike lane. That sidewalk doesn't feel safe, but we should have, that's why I think it's important the CIP incorporate the whole area, because when it is redeveloped, what can we expect? What can we then expect redevelopers of that area to do to make it so that we have a multi-use path in this part of the neighborhood too, instead of seeing redevelopment and then the same facilities are still there that we already know aren't adequate, aren't safe, don't meet our level of traffic stress. When they were built, we didn't care about that, but that's why it's really important, I think, that we do this not just in areas that are undeveloped and will be developed, but in redeveloped area. And the other is, of course, the analysis of speed, because, and I really, why it's so important to use the 24-hour model, because it might feel safe when there's lots of cars going at the speed limit or maybe below, but as soon as, you know, it starts getting dark or early in the morning or something, and people are walking on that same path, and someone can drive along at much, much greater speed. So speed has to be done, included in that analysis of whether and how that pathway meets our standards, and that's right. And I know you're doing that, and that's part of trying to make that fit.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner McKinney.
I do have one question for Ryan, just to clarify one aspect of your presentation. Was your presentation indicating that we don't have the authority to require developers to put in a 10-foot multi-use pathway, or did I misunderstand? What's the, because I'm thinking to the one slide that talked about, you know, what cities do and what we do and what developers do and so on. I just want to understand, do we have the authority to require developers to put in the multi-use pathway that we want, or is it, you know, do we only have the ability to ask them to do that?
Madam President, Commission, the Commission always has the authority. As staff using adopted policy, it doesn't have the 10-foot multi-use pathway in there. And so when staff is reviewing a development application, we are at this point only able to request, ask, work with the cities, ask the cities to do that. If the policy was modified to allow staff to require the 10-foot multi-use pathway, we can, as staff, do that. The Commission can always make findings and do additional requirements over and above what staff is currently able to do.
Well, basically, this comes back to us. In other words, if we want to require that sort of thing, we have the power to change the policy to require it, but the policy doesn't currently require it, and therefore staff is enforcing the current policy. Is that what you're saying?
Madam President, Commissioner, that's what we are able to do. And that's why we had draft language in there to show what that language could look like if the Commission would like us to pursue bringing that forward.
And do we currently have anything on the schedule, the plan to consider that policy change?
That's what I was going to talk about next. So
okay.
That's perfect. But Steve, did you have something to add to Commissioner McKinney's comments?
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner McKinney, one of the tenets under eminent domain law, and that we really go off of that in terms of exactions. Now remember, exactions are one tool, impact fees are another in terms of development. We're one of the few jurisdictions that gets to do both, impact fees and exact improvements. And in order for us to acquire the right of way, one thing we have to demonstrate is public necessity. Now, there's a variation of what some people think is public necessity, but I will tell you that the way a court looks at it is it in a plan? Have you gone out to the public? And if we put and Commissioner Hanson, I appreciate your comment about including those within the CIP. We include the multi-use pass in the CIP or in our plan, then we have the ability to do both. One, impact fees and exaction. And we typically, well, we do exact mostly sidewalks. Now remember, we have the authority to do side pass and sidewalks. And so I think the policy changes to go our authority to actually what we can do and include that in our planning documents, as well as give our staff the authority by policy to be able to do that.
Thank you for that addition, Steve. Commissioner Gold?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Just considering the potential policy modification draft language that you showed up there, and to President Pickering's earlier point, maybe the addition of some and/or language with street trees for other vertical elements.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you, Ryan. My thought was, and I don't have like all of the timelines of the various policy discussions we've currently had. So if you remember, we've got public hearing on access management on the 7th of June. My thought process was we could have at least an initial draft, hopefully by the 7th, not that we need to have the public hearing, or I think we could have a minor work session on the 7th with a draft policy language, working with staff. And then any other considerations that you all have, send those to me. Steve, we'd be happy to incorporate it. And then I'm hoping that we could have, we'll know from there based off of the flavor of the policy draft and the feedback from the commission, how much time we need. Hoping that we can get something like this figured out and finalized much before our budget discussion, so hopefully within the next month or two. So that's my timeline. But Commissioner Goldthorpe, did you have something?
One of the good things, if you want to call it that, about this particular policy discussion and decision is that over the last few years since we started the serious discussions about multi-use pathways, our staff has become incredibly intuitive as to the desires of the commission. So this should not be hard.
I will thank you for that.
It's true.
I hope it isn't either. So, all right. Are there any other questions? Thank you, staff. Thank you, team. Thanks to all those that tuned in, and we'll see you next week. Oh, and welcome, Aaron.